On this Sunday night, the death toll from COVID-19 grows in Canada, stopping the crisis from getting worse.
If we don't prevent this from occurring, it will just get out of control and be too late.
And the cross-country debate over easing health restrictions, the collateral crisis involving children, and why ER doctors are sounding the alarm, plus preserving Black American Sign Language.
If there's nothing, then there's something we have to do about it.
The history behind the dialect for the hearing impaired, and the Montreal musician who went from TikTok to The Tonight Show.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with a reminder of the toll of this pandemic in Canada. We didn't imagine this when we first learned about the novel coronavirus a year ago. As of today, more than 20,000 Canadians have lost their lives to COVID-19. Daily new case numbers have gone down over the past few weeks, but Canada's top health officials say the risk remains high. The new highly infectious strains pose a danger to cases surging again. Even so, some provinces are beginning to lift restrictions. Mike Drolet has our top story tonight.
Albertans are getting a break. Tough COVID-19 restrictions will begin easing on February 8th, starting with restaurants and gyms.
So when you can come, just leave the house and go somewhere else where a human being can actually keep you accountable, I think is big.
In Quebec, Premier François Legault has set his sights on the same date to give the economy much-needed oxygen. Both provinces are working off the same data. National numbers are trending downward. The 7-day average from January 22nd to 28th dropped under 5,000 cases, roughly where the country was in mid-November, but still nowhere near the summer lows. And with the national positivity rate over 4%, Canadian Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam maintains COVID-19 control measures must be strong and sustained. Of considerable concern has been the slow rollout of the vaccine, the potential impact of the new variant, first found in the UK, which is about 50% more transmissible than other variants.
And my fear is that by easing restrictions now, we're putting ourselves in a place where we're again going to be reactive rather than proactive. If we don't prevent this from occurring, it will just get out of control and be too late.
And that's not hyperbole. The UK saw its cases quadruple in only a month after the variant became the predominant strain, leading to a third national lockdown. It's because of the UK example that New Brunswick has taken a different approach to easing restrictions. The size of household bubbles will increase, but so too will strict quarantine rules for out-of-province visitors. That strategy aligns with the Canadian Shield, a proposal by leading public health experts which argues for severe short-term restrictions, similar to what was implemented in Australia and New Zealand.
This is, in a sense, a chance for us to kind of redo what we failed to do last spring, which is to really eliminate these variants before they really spread across the community.
But for it to work, Canadians will have to buy in, and there's no certainty in that. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
There's a new concern emerging from this pandemic. Emergency room doctors in many parts of Canada say they're seeing more cases of child abuse. They believe it's a result of the lockdowns and restrictions. And as Morganne Campbell explains, there are fears if these cases go underreported and help isn't found for these families, there could be another health crisis.
The novel coronavirus has forced many Canadians indoors during the winter months, and some doctors say that may be one of the causes behind a worrying trend.
Reports of child abuse have decreased significantly during the pandemic, and we don't think that's because there are less concerns.
Since September, Dr. Michelle Ward has seen and treated more than twice as many infants for maltreatment concerns, children under the age of 1 needing medical attention for fractures and head trauma.
Particularly injuries to the brain, to the eyes that can happen when force is used with a child even in those moments, can have lifelong consequences.
In Vancouver, Dr. Nita Jain co-authored a study looking into child abuse, neglect, and its connection to the COVID-19 pandemic. In the early months, the BC Children's Hospital, where she works, believed many abuse and neglect cases were going underreported. But during the second wave, a new problem, a rise in the number of nutritional neglect and starvation.
These are, I believe, families that were just so stretched and so stressed that we didn't recognize as a society how much they were struggling.
The Isaac Walton Killam Hospital in Halifax treats youth across the Maritimes who need specialized care, which gives doctors a snapshot of what may be happening in that region, which means children are better monitored.
Those systems are in place, and so you're right, that very well may be one of the factors that's explaining the differences that we're seeing between regions.
Doctors and advocates are also highlighting the pandemic as an especially tough time for new parents who are isolated from family and friends.
Beyond the family, beyond the community, we need our policymakers to make investments in the care of our children.
Those who work in child welfare and advocacy say they want parents to come forward if they are struggling and to erase the stigma of asking for help. Morganne Campbell, Global News, Toronto.
After months of diplomatic disputes and delays, the team from the World Health Organization got its first look at the animal market in China, where COVID-19 was first detected. There was a heavy security presence at the now shuttered market, and the site has been heavily sanitized. The team plans to visit more markets, as well as hospitals and labs. But the probe has become highly politicized. China has been accused of a cover-up, and to avoid blame for how it handled the crisis, the country has rejected calls for an independent investigation. In the U.S., it'll be a tough week for President Joe Biden. He's facing a huge battle to get a $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief bill passed by Congress. It's critical for the millions of unemployed Americans and the millions waiting to be vaccinated. Here's Jennifer Johnson.
A storm is brewing at the White House after 10 Republican senators asked for a meeting with President Joe Biden to consider their counter-proposal $600 billion COVID-19 relief plan. The president's package, more than 3 times that amount, has little to no GOP support.
If you want unity, if you want bipartisanship, you ought to start with a group that's shown it's willing to work together for a common solution.
Bringing America together, uniting our people.
Republicans using the president's own inauguration words against him. The president's team says it will work with the GOP, but it needs to be fast after more than 1.7 million Americans filed for unemployment the past 2 weeks.
This is an unprecedented crisis, but really the cost of inaction, the cost of failing to do this or delaying for another month really outweighs the cost of taking this action.
President Biden wants Congress to pass the bill this week before the Senate is bogged down with former President Donald Trump's impeachment trial.
I don't care what anybody says. We have got to deal with this pandemic. We have got to make sure that we are producing the vaccines that we need and get those vaccines into the arms of people.
$90 billion in the bill will pay for a federal vaccination program as new, more transmissible variants are quickly spreading across the country.
The surge that is likely to occur with this new variant from England is going to happen in the next 6 to 14 weeks. We are going to see something like we have not seen yet in this country.
With the vaccine supply still low, federal health officials are particularly concerned about these new variants surging in people over 65. They say while hospitalizations have leveled off, there is a hurricane coming. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
The war vet who raised millions for the British healthcare system at the beginning of the pandemic is now in hospital with COVID-19. Captain Tom Moore's daughter shared the news on Twitter. She says he's not in ICU but needs help breathing. Moore has been battling pneumonia and tested positive for the virus last week. Sir Tom, who was knighted by the Queen in July, is 3 months away from turning 101. We have breaking news tonight. Myanmar's Aung San Suu Kyi has been detained. She and other senior figures from Myanmar's ruling party were reportedly arrested in an early morning raid. The military said a coup could not be ruled out if complaints of widespread voting fraud in last November's election were ignored. The Canadian government is condemning the detention of thousands of protesters in Russia and calling for their release. For weeks, supporters of the country's opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, have been protesting his arrest. Ross Lord has the latest on the unrest rattling Russia.
Despite 2 weekends of nationwide protests, Russian President Vladimir Putin has not freed his most prominent opponent, Alexei Navalny. But those who study Russia have noticed something significant.
There are disturbing signs for the Putin regime because the people of Russia seem to be losing their fear. There is a growing force of civil society. There is increasing concern about the dire economic conditions in Russia.
Police detained thousands of protesters in Moscow as large crowds demanding Navalny's release marched towards the prison where he's being held. Navalny was poisoned last summer, falling into a coma. After recovering in Germany, he flew home to Moscow 2 weeks ago and was immediately arrested. At this weekend's protests, riot police clubbed protesters with batons, released tear gas, and shot stun guns. I can't breathe. I'm telling the truth. Let me go, said this protester, subdued on a sidewalk. The new American administration is taking a dim view of the police response. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. condemns the persistent use of harsh tactics against peaceful protesters and journalists. Blinken also renewed a call for Russia to release those detained for exercising their human rights, including Alexei Navalny. In Moscow, police imposed a security lockdown, closing off streets and public transit stations. But some suggest the crackdown won't work forever.
The crucial tipping point is a loss of nerve. That's what we saw in Eastern Europe. That's when regimes collapse. We are not there yet, but I think the Kremlin is very worried.
He says growing international support could keep Navalny safe and make protesters even more determined. They plan to protest at his court appearance Tuesday, where he faces a possible prison sentence stemming from a 2014 embezzlement conviction, a case Europe's top human rights court called politically motivated. Ross Lord, Global News.
In India, farmers protesting new agriculture laws have turned to a hunger strike. They're trying to show the movement is peaceful after recent demonstrations turned violent. Since November, tens of thousands of farmers have camped out near the Indian capital, demanding the government repeal laws they say will devastate their earnings and favor larger corporations. Coming up, the contentious role of social media. Is it a referral service? It was a fiery night in Sicily. Lava spewed down the slopes of Mount Etna in another spectacular eruption. The volcanic activity was expected and the surrounding area was secured. No injuries were reported. Etna is Europe's most active volcano. It has already erupted several times since the new year. The days of web giants like Facebook resisting content regulation seem to be over. There's now a move to give them guardrails to win back trust. But it's unclear exactly how Canada will do that in a way which will be acceptable to the social media site. Here's Mike Licouture.
We welcome regulation. We're calling for more of it.
A decidedly different tone from Facebook before a parliamentary committee hearing. In the past, web giants like Facebook have resisted regulations by governments, but the Canadian head of the social media platform is signaling a shift.
Regulations could set baseline standards for what kind of content is prohibited online and require social media companies to build systems to enforce these standards. The status quo of having private companies decide what is and isn't acceptable speech online is not sustainable longer term and lacks transparency.
The change comes from the top. Last year, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg said if there aren't standards, then people could lose faith in institutions of technology. Some observers believe it's part of a strategy to appear more open.
They accept a certain type of regulation that doesn't undermine their business model, and in fact might even help them, both in relation to other competitors, but also helps them make these tough decisions around what kind of speech should stay on or stay off.
Canada is looking at content regulation separately from content remuneration, which is an even bigger issue. Facebook is pushing back against Australia's model to have web giants pay news organizations for content shared on their platforms. Chan says Facebook offers a referral value.
Newspaper publishers in Canada benefit from free distribution on Facebook, which we estimate to be on the order of hundreds of millions of dollars.
Some MPs pushed back on that sense of benevolence.
Newspapers are dropping like flies in this country, and this is one of the biggest issue, if not the biggest issue right now in that industry, is they're getting nothing from you.
Nous examinons actuellement une
Heritage Minister Stéphane Guilbeault told the committee the government is looking at a made-in-Canada formula to compensate news organizations for their content shared on digital platforms. The minister says legislation for both remuneration and regulation is coming soon. Michael Couture, Global News, Ottawa.
Still ahead, the history behind Black American Sign Language. Monday marks the beginning of Black History Month. It's an opportunity to celebrate the identity and culture of the Black community. That includes looking at communication through a different lens. Black American Sign Language has been the subject of research projects, books, and now viral videos. As Nadia Stewart reports, the increased visibility is prompting calls for a deeper understanding of the Black deaf community in Canada.
Nakia Smith's viral social media videos are what caught the eyes of producers at Netflix. As she communicated using Black American Sign Language, or Black ASL, a language many people know little about. But for the Black deaf community in the United States, it's how they communicate.
People have said when they watch Black deaf people use sign language, they definitely notice a difference.
It is a language Dr. Carolyn McCaskill has gone to great lengths to preserve, celebrate, and share. She grew up in the segregated South, at first going to the Alabama School for the Negro Deaf and Blind.
But when I remained there and I moved to the white school, again in 1968, I didn't understand the teachers the same way. Even though both schools were 15 minutes apart, they were pretty close. It was really quite a difference.
In 3 different states in Black Deaf Institutes, for example, the bathroom sign in North Carolina, Black Deaf Institute was that sign for bathroom. In Virginia, that was the sign for bathroom.
That's when McCaskill realized there was a difference in the way Black deaf people signed versus their white counterparts, in part because of the influence of Ebonics, or African American slang, and partly because this is what happens in segregated communities.
We know from decades of sociolinguistic research that in communities like this that are separated, the language variety is going to emerge.
McCaskill worked with Seal Lucas from Gallaudet University and Rochester Institute of Technology Associate Professor Dr. Joseph Hill, among others, to produce a book and a series of videos about the history and unique cultural differences of Black ASL. But since last summer, amidst widespread Black Lives Matter protests, interest in Black ASL has significantly increased. Similarly, there are calls in Canada for more recognition of the Black deaf community here, something both McCaskill and Hill support.
Is there a book about us? Is there a film about us? Is there research about us? Who am I? If there's nothing, then there's something we have to do about it. Something has to be done.
They're also encouraged by a new generation introducing more people to the hidden treasure that is Black ASL. Nadia Stewart, Global News, Vancouver.
Global News will launch a new online series called Perspectives, with in-depth stories looking at the lives of racialized communities in Canada. It begins tomorrow, so check it out on globalnews.ca. Up next, the social media star turning online tirades into tunes. A 4-year-old discovered this well-preserved dinosaur footprint on a beach in Wales. It measures 10 centimeters long. Scientists don't know which dinosaur made the imprint, but believe it dates back 220 million years. The fossil, which has been taken to the National Museum, could help them learn more about how dinosaurs walked. There's no arguing that online debates can get heated these days. Scrolling through social media, it's easy to find fights among strangers, family members, and celebrities. Well, one Montreal man has turned that online trash talk into treasure on TikTok. Dan Spector has the story.
I mean, yeah, it's crazy. I have no idea. It's like a dream.
He calls himself Lubalin, and from somewhere in Montreal's southwest, the musician has been gaining worldwide fame by turning internet drama into songs. This one has been seen nearly 33 million times on TikTok. She stole my broccoli, casserole recipe 8 years ago.
And I just thought, how funny would it be to take something really stupid, like an argument on the internet, and then spend days like trying to craft a beautiful song around it.
Another 33 million views for this exchange about an apartment listing. You contacted me. I know I'm no longer interested. Please stop contacting me now. I will contact Attorney General if you do not stop. A few months ago, he was just another struggling musician trying to find his way. Some of his early videos, like this Lil Nas X choir cover, gained some traction. All my homies on go, and I hope that you know it. But the first internet drama video changed everything.
First 2 hours, it had 270,000 views. In another hour, it had reached 1 million, and then in another hour, it had done 2 million.
The second one cemented his place as a viral sensation and brought him to places he never imagined.
And I was just like, oh, this is kind of like a Jimmy Fallon sense of humor thing. So when I got the email, I just like lost my mind. Which salad dressing is your favorite? Steakhouse blue cheese dressing. Blue cheese has mold in it. Suddenly, Jimmy Fallon and actress Alison Brie were in the next video on a debate about salad dressings.
What's up, Lubalin? How you doing?
Lubalin does not know exactly where the journey will take him next. He's just released a single of what he calls his not-so-funny music and says high-profile artists are lining up to collaborate.
It's people that I would never have imagined would reach out to me. Yeah.
Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia. Thank you so much for watching. Donna Friesen is back at the desk tomorrow, and I'll see you on Thursday. Have a great night and a great week.